Emperor Theron ruled the Celestial Dragon Empire with absolute power. His silver scales gleamed under the lights of 1,000 suns, and 12 star systems bowed before his throne. Yet in the vastness of his palace, surrounded by loyal guards and wise advisors, the mighty emperor faced one challenge that defeated him completely. His own son. Prince Ethan was 8 years old. He should have been learning combat forms with other dragon youth. He should have been practicing speeches for royal ceremonies. He should have been preparing to one day rule the greatest empire in the known galaxy. Instead, Ethan sat alone in the corner of his chambers, arranging small colored stones into perfect spiraling patterns. Over and over. The same pattern. 4 hours. The young prince had never completed a single royal ceremony. Last week, during the harvest celebration, everything had gone wrong. The ceremonial drums had thundered through the grand hall, their deep booming echoing off stone walls. Ethan had covered his ears with both hands, his small face twisted in pain. When the horns blared their traditional fanfare, the prince had bolted from the dais and hidden under a table, trembling. Court advisors whispered behind their clawed hands. The servants exchanged worried glances. The visiting dignitaries from neighboring systems raised their eyebrows in surprise. The heir to the Celestial Dragon Empire had run away from a simple ceremony like a frightened child. Theron had found his son an hour later, still under that table, rocking back and forth. The prince was humming 3 notes. The same 3 notes. Over and over. Nothing the emperor said could reach him. Ethan just kept rocking, kept humming, his eyes unfocused and distant. This was not new. This had been happening for years. When Ethan was 4, Theron had noticed his son never looked anyone in the eye. The boy would stare at walls, at floors, at his own hands. But never at faces. Dragon culture considered eye contact essential. It showed respect, strength, confidence. A future emperor who could not meet another being's gaze? Unthinkable. When Ethan was 5, the problems grew worse. He would only eat 3 specific foods. He wore the same style of clothing every day, and screamed if anyone tried to dress him in ceremonial robes. The textures were wrong, he would cry. Everything felt wrong. When Ethan was 6, other dragon children stopped inviting him to play. He did not understand their games. He did not laugh at their jokes. He preferred to sit alone, organizing objects by size or color or shape. The other children called him strange. Some called him broken. By age 7, Ethan had stopped trying to make friends at all. Theron loved his son desperately. But he did not understand him. The emperor had consulted every physician in the empire. They had examined Ethan thoroughly. Their diagnosis was always the same. The prince was weak. He lacked discipline. He needed to be toughened up. The physicians prescribed harsh treatments. Exposure therapy, they called it. They forced Ethan to sit through loud ceremonies until he learned to tolerate them. They made him practice eye contact for hours. They forbade his repetitive behaviors. No more organizing stones. No more humming. No more rocking. These were signs of weakness that must be eliminated. The treatments failed. Ethan did not improve. He withdrew further into himself. He stopped speaking almost entirely. He developed new behaviors. He would flap his hands rapidly when stressed. He would spin in circles after difficult days. He would line up every object in his room with perfect precision. The court advisors grew bolder in their criticism. How can this child inherit the throne, they asked. He cannot even attend a simple gathering. He cannot make conversation with foreign diplomats. He cannot command respect. A dragon emperor must be strong, dominant, fearless. Prince Ethan was none of these things. Some advisors suggested replacing Ethan in the line of succession. Name a cousin as heir instead. Someone stronger. Someone normal. Theron refused absolutely. Ethan was his son. His only child. The emperor would not abandon him. But privately, in the dark hours of night, Theron felt his hope fading. He did not know how to help his boy. He did not know how to reach him. Every day, Ethan seemed to drift further away, retreating into a world Theron could not enter. Then one night, Theron sat in his private study, surrounded by medical reports and psychiatric evaluations. All of them said the same thing. Defective. Damaged. Broken. The emperor's hands shook as he read them. His son was not defective. Ethan was sweet and gentle. He was brilliant with numbers and patterns. He had a perfect memory. He noticed details others missed. There was so much good in the boy. Why could no one else see it? A knock interrupted his thoughts. His chief advisor entered and bowed low. Your Majesty, the advisor said carefully. The human settlement on the outer moon has sent a message. They are offering services to the palace. Teachers, caregivers, various workers. Perhaps we could find someone there to help with the prince's situation. Humans. Theron almost dismissed the idea immediately. Dragons viewed humans as weak creatures. They were small, fragile, and far too emotional. They relied on feelings rather than strength. They built their societies on cooperation rather than dominance. Most dragons considered humans primitive. But Theron had run out of options. Every dragon physician had failed. Every dragon therapist had made things worse. Perhaps a different perspective was needed. Perhaps weakness was not always what it seemed. Send for someone experienced with difficult children, Theron ordered. Someone patient. 3 days later, a human woman arrived at the palace. Her name was Rachel. She wore simple clothes and carried a small bag. Her brown hair was tied back practically. She did not cower before the massive dragon emperor, but she did not challenge him either. She simply bowed respectfully and waited. Most beings trembled in the throne room. The ceiling soared hundreds of feet high. Pillars of crystal reflected light in dazzling patterns. The emperor's throne was carved from a single massive diamond, and Theron himself was enormous. His head was larger than a human vehicle. One claw could crush a person effortlessly. Rachel stood calmly, her hands folded, her expression peaceful. "My son needs a caretaker," Theron said. His voice boomed through the chamber. "Someone who can manage his difficulties. The physicians have failed. I am told humans have experience with such children." Rachel tilted her head slightly. "May I ask what difficulties the prince experiences, Your Majesty?" Theron listed them. The avoidance of eye contact. The sensitivity to sounds and textures. The repetitive behaviors. The social isolation. The meltdowns during ceremonies. The inability to handle changes in routine. Rachel listened carefully. When the emperor finished, she asked a single question. "May I meet him?" Theron led her through the palace. They walked in silence, the emperor's massive form moving with surprising grace, Rachel following with quiet footsteps. They reached Ethan's chambers in the eastern tower. The traditional location for the heir. Close to the ceremonial bells that rang every morning. Close to the grand halls where crowds gathered. Close to everything that made Ethan miserable. The emperor opened the door carefully. Inside, Prince Ethan sat on the floor surrounded by hundreds of small stones. He was arranging them in a complex spiral pattern, each stone perfectly placed. His small dragon form was hunched over his work, completely absorbed. He hummed those same 3 notes, soft and repetitive. Rachel did not rush forward. She did not try to greet the prince or make him acknowledge her. Instead, she stepped quietly into the room and sat down near the doorway. Far from Ethan. Not invading his space. She simply sat and watched. Theron started to speak, but Rachel raised one finger gently. "Wait," her gesture said. So the emperor waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. Ethan continued his work, seemingly unaware of their presence. His fingers moved with perfect precision, placing each stone exactly where it belonged. When he completed the spiral, he studied it for a long moment. Then he carefully dismantled it and began again. The same pattern. Perfect repetition. After 20 minutes, Rachel spoke. Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Those are beautiful patterns, Ethan." The prince's humming stopped for just a moment. His hands paused. Then he continued, but something had shifted. He had heard her. He had processed her words. Rachel stood slowly and turned to face Theron. She stepped outside the room and the emperor followed. "I will take the position," Rachel said simply. "But I need complete authority over Ethan's daily routine and environment. No interference from your court physicians." The demand was outrageous. A human giving orders in the Dragon Imperial Palace? Theron's advisors would be furious. But the emperor thought of his son, sitting alone with his stones, lost in a world no one else understood. He thought of the failed treatments and the harsh judgments and the word that appeared in every report. Defective. He thought of how Rachel had sat patiently, watching without judgment, and had seen beauty in Ethan's patterns when others saw only pointless repetition. "Done," Theron said. "Help my son." Rachel nodded once. Then she surprised him with a small smile. "I have seen many children like Ethan, Your Majesty. I understand what your empire does not. Your son's brain works differently, not wrongly. And I know exactly where to start." Over the next few days, Theron found himself watching this human woman with growing fascination. Rachel moved through the palace quietly, making small changes that seemed insignificant but produced remarkable results. She spent hours observing Ethan, taking notes, asking careful questions. The emperor's heart stirred with something unfamiliar. Hope. Real hope. For the first time since his son's birth, Theron wondered if perhaps Ethan was not broken after all. Perhaps the Empire had simply been looking at him wrong. And this human woman, this small creature his culture dismissed as weak, she saw what an entire civilization of mighty dragons had missed. She saw not a defective prince but simply a different one. Theron began to wonder what else his empire had gotten wrong. What else had they dismissed as weakness that was actually strength in disguise? What other truths had they missed because they only valued one way of being, one way of thinking, one definition of power? Rachel had been in the palace for less than a week, and already she was changing everything. Starting with the Emperor himself. Retried. Rachel spent her first week doing something that confused everyone in the palace. She did not try to teach Ethan anything. She did not correct his behaviors. She did not force him to practice eye contact or sit through loud ceremonies. She simply watched. And she took notes. Lots of notes. She noticed that every morning at dawn, ceremonial gongs rang throughout the palace. The sound echoed through stone corridors, deep and resonating. Beautiful to dragon ears. But the moment those gongs sounded, Ethan would press his palms over his ears and scramble under his sleeping platform. He would stay there, trembling for 20 minutes after the sound stopped. Rachel noticed that the bright glowing orbs lighting every dragon room flickered slightly. Imperceptible to most. But Ethan would stare at them, blinking rapidly, his distress growing throughout the day. She noticed that certain textures made the prince recoil. Rough stone. Scratchy fabrics. Even some foods. He would pull his hand back as if burned. She noticed that Ethan checked the daily schedule constantly. When would meals happen? When would lessons begin? When would his father visit? Any deviation from routine sent him into anxiety. His humming would grow louder. His rocking would intensify. Everything the dragon physicians had called problems, Rachel recognized as communication. Ethan was telling everyone exactly what hurt him, what overwhelmed him, what he needed. He had been speaking all along. No one had been listening in the right language. On her 8th day, Rachel requested a meeting with Emperor Theron. She came prepared with a list. Your Majesty, she began respectfully. I need to make changes to Prince Ethan's environment. His chambers must be moved immediately. Theron frowned. The Eastern Tower is traditional for the heir. It has been so for generations. The Eastern Tower is directly beside the ceremonial bells, Rachel said patiently. Every morning Ethan experiences those sounds as physically painful. His hearing is more sensitive than yours. What you perceive as beautiful ceremony he experiences as assault. The Emperor started to protest, then stopped. He remembered finding Ethan under the sleeping platform every morning, trembling and nonverbal for hours afterward. He had thought his son was simply being difficult. But what if the boy was actually in pain? Move his chambers, Theron ordered his advisors. The Western Wing. The quietest section. But tradition and advisor sputtered. Tradition can adapt, Rachel said firmly. And to everyone's shock, the Emperor nodded agreement. Within 2 days Ethan had new chambers. Rachel lined the walls with soft, sound-absorbing fabrics. She replaced the flickering glowing orbs with steady, gentle lights that did not change intensity. She created a corner filled with cushions and weighted blankets where Ethan could retreat when the world became too much. The response was immediate. The prince's constant anxiety decreased. His rocking became less frantic. His humming shifted from distress to almost content. Next, Rachel introduced visual schedules. She created simple picture cards showing each activity of the day. Wake up. Breakfast. Star chart time. Garden walk. Lunch. Quiet time. Dinner. Free play. Sleep. She placed them in order on a board in Ethan's room. The first morning, Ethan stared at the schedule for 10 minutes. Then he checked it before breakfast, and before lessons, and before the garden walk. Each time his body language relaxed. He knew what was coming next. No surprises. No sudden changes. The predictability gave him safety. Rachel explained it to Theron one evening. Imagine if every day things happened randomly. No warning. No pattern. Someone suddenly grabbed you. Loud noises exploded without notice. Your plans changed constantly. You would feel anxious too. Ethan just needs to know what is coming so he can prepare himself. The Emperor watched his son check the visual schedule for the 5th time that day, and understanding dawned. Ethan was not being stubborn or difficult. He was trying to feel safe in a world that felt chaotic and overwhelming. Rachel made more changes. She noticed Ethan loved star charts. He would study them for hours, memorizing every constellation, every trade route, every celestial pattern. The dragon tutors had forbidden this. Too much time on one subject, they said. He must have varied lessons. Rachel did the opposite. She brought Ethan more star charts. Hundreds of them. Ancient ones, modern ones, theoretical ones. She let him arrange them however he wanted. She did not interrupt or redirect. She simply let him engage with what he loved. And something remarkable happened. Ethan began to relax around her. After 2 weeks, he would seek her presence. He would bring her his star charts to show her his patterns. He still did not make eye contact. He still did not speak much. But he was connecting in his own way. One afternoon, Theron found Rachel sitting on the floor of Ethan's chambers. The prince was arranging star charts in an elaborate pattern that covered half the room. Rachel sat nearby, not interfering, just present. "Why do you let him do that for hours?" the emperor asked quietly. The physician said his repetitive behaviors needed to be stopped. Rachel gestured for Theron to come closer. She pointed at the pattern Ethan had created. "Look carefully, Your Majesty. What do you see?" Theron studied the arrangement. At first it seemed random. Just charts placed in spiral formations. But then he noticed something. The spiral matched the actual configuration of the Orion trade routes. Every planet, every station, every jump point. Perfectly accurate. From memory. "He is learning," Rachel whispered. "What looks like play to you is how his brain processes and stores information." Those physicians who tried to stop this behavior were actually interfering with his natural learning style. The emperor stared at his son with new eyes. Ethan was not wasting time. He was studying, practicing, mastering complex navigation in a way that worked for his unique mind. Rachel began teaching Theron directly. She explained that when Ethan avoided eye contact, it was not disrespect. Looking at faces could be genuinely uncomfortable for him, sometimes even painful. Forcing it only caused distress without building connection. She showed him that when Ethan echoed words back instead of answering questions, he was not being rude. He was processing language, buying himself time to formulate a response. She demonstrated that when Ethan needed to spin in circles after a stressful event, it helped regulate his sensory system. Like shaking out tension. Stopping him from spinning only trapped that stress inside. "On Earth we call it autism," Rachel explained one evening. She had brought books from the human settlement. Studies, guides, personal accounts. It is not a disease. Not a defect. Not something to cure. It is a different neurological structure. Ethan's brain is wired differently than yours. He experiences sensory input more intensely. Sounds are louder. Lights are brighter. Textures are more extreme. His brain seeks patterns and routines because they are predictable and therefore safe. Theron read everything she gave him. He stayed up late into the night, studying human research about autism. About sensory processing differences. About the importance of accommodations rather than forced conformity. One passage struck him deeply. It was written by an autistic adult. "For years, people tried to train the autism out of me. They saw my natural behaviors as broken things to fix. It was only when someone accepted me as I was and adapted the environment to suit my needs that I could truly thrive. I was never broken. The world was just not built for brains like mine." The emperor sat back, his heart heavy with regret. His physicians had been trying to train the autism out of Ethan. They had seen his natural behaviors as problems to eliminate. They had been trying to force his son to be someone he was not. Rachel was doing the opposite. She was accepting Ethan exactly as he was and changing the environment to suit him. Theron began implementing what he learned. He started announcing his presence before entering Ethan's space. A gentle knock. A verbal warning. "Ethan, it is your father. I am coming in now." It gave the prince time to prepare for the interaction. He stopped expecting eye contact. If Ethan looked at his hands or at the wall while they talked, that was fine. The emperor focused on his son's words, not where his eyes pointed. He gave advance warnings for any change. "Ethan, in 5 minutes we will go to the garden. Then 4 minutes. Then 3. Then 2. Then 1. The countdown helped Ethan transition between activities. And miraculously his son responded. Ethan began tolerating changes better when he had warning. He started spending more time with his father. They would sit side by side arranging star charts. Theron would tell stories about each constellation while Ethan organized them into patterns. Father and son, connecting through shared interest rather than forced interaction. One evening, something incredible happened. Rachel was preparing to leave Ethan's chambers for the night. She said her usual goodbye. "Good night, Ethan. I will see you tomorrow morning after breakfast." The prince looked up from his star charts. He approached her slowly. Then, without warning, he gently pressed his forehead against her arm. In dragon culture, this was a gesture of deep trust and affection. Something Ethan had never done with anyone except his father, and even that was rare. Rachel's eyes filled with tears. She remained very still, letting Ethan maintain the contact as long as he needed. After a moment he pulled back and returned to his charts. But something profound had happened. He had initiated affection. He had shown connection. Theron watched from the doorway and his heart clenched in his chest. This human woman, whom his entire empire dismissed as weak and primitive, had reached his son in ways the greatest dragon minds could not. She had brought peace where there had been only distress. She had built connection where there had been only isolation. The Emperor realized he was no longer watching Rachel work just to help his son. He watched because Rachel herself fascinated him. Her patience seemed infinite. Her compassion was genuine. Her understanding was deep. She possessed a kind of strength his warrior culture had never recognized. The strength to accept rather than dominate. To adapt rather than force. To understand rather than judge. For the first time in his long life, Theron felt something beyond duty and power. He felt respect that bordered on awe. And beneath that, something warmer. Something that stirred in his chest when Rachel smiled at his son. Something that made him want to be better, to understand more, to see the world through her eyes. He did not yet have a name for this feeling. But it was growing stronger every day. And it frightened him as much as it thrilled him. Because Emperor Theron, ruler of 12 star systems, was falling for a human maid who had taught him that true strength included gentleness, and real power embraced difference. 3 months after Rachel arrived at the palace, Prince Ethan experienced his first major meltdown in her presence. And it taught Emperor Theron more about his son than years of physician reports ever had. It started with an unannounced visit. A diplomatic delegation from the Outer Rim systems arrived early, without proper warning. Palace protocol demanded they be received immediately. Suddenly, the quiet western corridors filled with dozens of beings. Loud voices echoed off stone walls. Heavy footsteps thundered through hallways. Strange scents from different species mingled in the air. Ethan had been walking to the garden. It was on his schedule. Garden time happened every day at the same hour. It was safe, predictable, calming. But when he turned the corner, he found the familiar corridor transformed into chaos. Tall aliens crowded the passage. Their voices boomed in languages he did not know. They moved unpredictably, gesturing wildly as they talked. The sensory input hit Ethan like a physical blow. Too much sound. Too much movement. Too much smell. Too much everything. The prince's carefully maintained composure shattered instantly. He dropped to the floor, both hands clamped over his ears. A scream tore from his throat. Not a scream of anger or tantrum. A scream of genuine pain and terror. His whole body went rigid, then began to shake. Dragon guards rushed forward to help. They reached for the prince, trying to lift him, to move him away from the crowd. Stop. Rachel's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Do not touch him. The guards froze, startled. A human servant giving them orders? Unthinkable. But something in Rachel's tone made them obey. She moved quickly but calmly through the crowd. Everyone back, she said firmly. Clear this corridor now. To everyone's surprise, the diplomatic delegation stepped aside. Perhaps they heard the authority in her voice. Perhaps they saw the genuine crisis unfolding. Either way they moved. Rachel did not approach Ethan directly. She knew from experience that touch during a meltdown often made things worse. Instead, she sat down on the floor about 6 feet away from him. She made herself small, non-threatening. And she began to hum. The same 3 notes Ethan always hummed when he needed to self-soothe. The prince's screaming continued, but Rachel kept humming. Soft, steady, predictable. A familiar pattern in the midst of chaos. Minutes passed. 5, 10, 15. Slowly, gradually, Ethan's screams subsided into sobs. The sobs became hitching breaths. His rigid body began to relax slightly. Rachel spotted a doorway nearby. Ethan, she said gently, using simple, direct language. Quiet room. 3 steps away. Safe space. The prince's eyes, wild and unfocused, tracked toward the door. With trembling limbs he crawled toward it. Rachel followed at a distance, giving him space. They reached a small storage room. Dim, quiet, empty. Ethan crawled into the farthest corner and curled into a tight ball. Rachel pulled a weighted blanket from the bag she always carried. She had learned to keep supplies everywhere Ethan might need them. She draped the blanket gently over him, not forcing contact, just offering the deep pressure his nervous system craved. The prince's breathing steadied under the weight. The blanket grounded him, helped him feel where his body was in space. Emperor Theron arrived then, his massive form filling the doorway. His scales were slightly raised, a sign of agitation. What happened, he demanded. Rachel stood and quietly explained. Sensory overload. Too much unexpected stimulation. His nervous system became completely overwhelmed and essentially shut down. This was not a tantrum, Your Majesty. This was a neurological response he cannot control. The Emperor stared at his son, still curled under the weighted blanket, and felt shame wash through him. How many times had physicians told him that Ethan's meltdowns were behavioral problems requiring discipline? How many times had they punished his son for something that was actually a medical crisis? That evening, after Ethan had recovered enough to sleep, Rachel met with Theron in his private study. She came prepared with a presentation. Charts, graphs, research papers. Very human in approach, which almost made the Emperor smile despite the day's stress. Your Majesty, Rachel began. Your empire needs to understand neurodiversity. Ethan is not the only one struggling. She explained that during her time in the palace, she had observed dozens of dragon youth showing similar traits. Children who were punished for rocking or humming. Young ones who were forced into overwhelming social situations. Students who were failing traditional education not because they were unintelligent, but because the teaching methods did not match how their brains processed information. All of them were being told they were broken. All of them were being forced to conform to a single standard of normal. Rachel showed Theron statistics from Earth. Studies about autistic individuals. When they were supported rather than forced to conform, when accommodations were provided rather than punishment, many developed extraordinary abilities. Pattern recognition that surpassed typical brains. Systematic thinking that solved complex problems others missed. Intense focus that allowed deep mastery of subjects. Attention to detail that caught errors everyone else overlooked. Your physicians have been trying to make Ethan fit a mold, Rachel continued, her voice passionate. They see his differences as defects to eliminate. But what if instead your empire adapted to include different kinds of minds? What if you built a society where people like Ethan could thrive as themselves, not as poor imitations of everyone else? Theron listened intently. Among dragons, strength meant physical power and social dominance. The ability to command, to intimidate, to conquer. Rachel was describing a completely different kind of strength. The strength of diversity. The power of inclusion. The wisdom of adaptation. What would you have me do? The Emperor asked quietly. Let me train your people, Rachel said. Your teachers. Your physicians. Your staff. Let me show them what I have shown you. That different does not mean defective. That accommodation is not weakness. That true strength includes the flexibility to adapt. Over the following weeks, Rachel conducted workshops throughout the palace. She taught staff about sensory sensitivities. About why some individuals needed quiet spaces or soft lighting or noise-reducing headphones. She explained the importance of routine and advance warning for changes. She demonstrated alternative communication methods for those who struggled with verbal speech. Many resisted. Dragons did not adapt to weakness, they argued. They eliminated it. Making accommodations would only enable dysfunction. But Theron stood firmly behind Rachel. When advisors complained, he silenced them with a single look. When physicians argued their traditional methods were superior, he pointed to Ethan's remarkable progress. The prince was thriving in ways no one had thought possible. He had begun using a picture board to communicate complex ideas when words failed him. He attended family meals now, sitting in a quiet corner Rachel had arranged away from the main table's chaos. He had even attended a small gathering of visiting dignitaries, wearing the noise-reducing headphones Rachel designed and taking breaks in his quiet room when needed. But the most remarkable change was in Ethan's relationship with his father. They spent evenings together now, sitting side by side. Theron would ask about Ethan's star charts, and the prince would explain his patterns using pictures and simple words and hand gestures. The Emperor had learned to communicate in his son's language rather than demanding his son speak in his. One evening, Ethan arranged his star charts in an unusual configuration. Theron studied it, confused. The pattern seemed random at first. But Rachel, looking over the Emperor's shoulder, gasped. What is it? Theron asked. Rachel pointed at the pattern with trembling fingers. The Helion cluster drift problem. Your deep space vessels experience navigational errors near that region. Your engineers have been trying to solve it for 30 years. Yes, Theron confirmed. The gravitational anomalies create unpredictable drift. We lose time and fuel compensating. Some ships have been lost entirely. Rachel looked at Ethan, still arranging his charts with careful precision. He just solved it, she whispered. What? Look at his pattern. He has mapped the gravitational fields as waves rather than points. If you navigate following the wave patterns instead of fighting against them, you could use the gravitational forces to assist travel rather than hinder it. Theron leaned closer, his massive head lowering to study his son's work. The pattern was elegant, simple, and it made perfect sense. Why had no one seen this before? Because no one thought like Ethan. The prince's unique brain, the one everyone called defective, saw patterns that typical minds missed entirely. The emperor called his chief engineers the next day. He presented Ethan's solution. They were skeptical at first. A child's star chart patterns? But they ran the calculations. And the calculations worked. Perfectly. The solution would revolutionize deep space travel throughout the empire. It would save countless lives and resources. And it came from the prince everyone had dismissed as broken. Word spread through the palace. Then through the empire. The defective heir had accomplished what the greatest minds could not. Theron watched the shift in how people treated his son. The whispers changed. The looks of pity became looks of respect. And the emperor understood something profound. Ethan had not changed. His abilities had been there all along. Society had simply been too rigid to recognize them. That evening, Theron found Rachel in the garden. She sat on a stone bench watching the sunset. The emperor settled beside her, his presence enormous but somehow gentle. "You have given me back my son," he said quietly. Rachel shook her head. "I just helped you see him clearly. He was always there, Your Majesty. Always brilliant. Always valuable. Just in ways your culture was not designed to recognize. You challenged everything my empire believes," Theron said. "And you were right about all of it." Rachel met his eyes. Not just his eyes, she realized. His gaze. And in that moment something passed between them. Recognition. Respect. And something deeper neither was quite ready to name yet. But it was there. Growing. Undeniable. A human and a dragon, connected by their love for a child who saw the universe differently than everyone else. The Halion cluster navigation solution changed everything in the empire overnight. Emperor Theron presented Prince Ethan's star chart patterns to his chief engineers in a formal meeting. The engineers arrived skeptical, some openly dismissive. A child's hobby solving a 3-decade-old problem? Impossible. But they ran the calculations anyway. First once. Then twice. Then a third time because they could not believe the results. The 8-year-old prince's pattern-based approach bypassed all the complex mathematical equations they had been attempting for 30 years. His visual, intuitive understanding of gravitational waves accomplished what their rigid formulas never could. The solution was not just correct. It was elegant, simple, perfect. Within a week, test ships reported 40% reduction in fuel consumption on Halion cluster routes. Navigation time decreased by half. The risk of drift-related accidents dropped to nearly zero. The economic impact would be massive. The safety improvements would save lives across the empire. Word spread like wildfire through the 12 star systems. The defective prince. The broken heir. The child everyone had pitted or scorned. He had just revolutionized space travel. Court advisors who had whispered cruel things about Ethan fell silent. Those who had questioned Rachel's methods suddenly requested meetings with her. Could she evaluate other struggling dragon youth? Could she train more staff? Could she establish programs throughout the empire? The cultural shift began slowly, but it began. Parents who had hidden their different children started bringing them forward. Teachers who had dismissed struggling students started asking for new approaches. The empire was waking up to something it had missed for generations. Theron commissioned Rachel to establish the empire's first neurodiversity institute. She would train educators across all 12 systems. Develop accommodation protocols for schools and workplaces. Create resources for families. Ensure that no child would ever again be dismissed as broken simply for thinking differently. Rachel threw herself into the work. But the professional relationship between her and the emperor had evolved into something neither had fully acknowledged yet. Something deeper. Something that grew stronger every day. Theron found reasons to attend Rachel's training sessions. He told himself it was because he needed to understand the programs being implemented. But truthfully, he just wanted to be near her. He watched how she taught with such passion. How she spoke about neurodiversity with absolute conviction. How she celebrated differences that others feared. Rachel noticed the emperor's presence at her sessions. She told herself he was simply being a thorough ruler, overseeing new initiatives. But she felt his gaze on her. Felt the weight of his attention. And her heart responded in ways that both thrilled and terrified her. They began spending evenings together with Ethan. What started as coordination about the prince's care became something more. After Ethan went to sleep, they would remain in his quiet room talking. About everything and nothing. Empire politics and earth culture. Philosophy and science. Dreams and fears. One evening, Theron asked about Rachel's life before the palace. She told him about being a teacher on Earth. About working with autistic children in a system that often failed them. About fighting school administrators who wanted conformity over understanding. About parents who saw their children as problems to fix. I got tired of fighting, Rachel admitted quietly. Every day was a battle. Convincing people that different children were not broken children. That accommodations were not special treatment. That neurodiversity made us stronger, not weaker. I left Earth because I needed to breathe. To find somewhere I could actually help. And did you find it? Theron asked. His voice was deeper than usual, gentle in a way few ever heard from the mighty Emperor. Rachel looked at Ethan, sleeping peacefully under his weighted blanket. She looked at Theron, this powerful being who had humbled himself to learn from a human teacher. Yes, she said softly. I found it here. With you both. Their hands were close on the cushioned floor. Theron's was massive, covered in silver scales. Rachel's was small, soft human skin. Neither moved to close the final inches between them. But both felt the pull. The magnetic attraction of two souls recognizing each other. The moment broke when Ethan stirred in his sleep, murmuring something. They both turned their attention to the prince, and the intimate moment passed. But it left something changed in the air between them. Weeks flowed into months. Ethan continued to flourish. He began using simple speech more regularly, though he still preferred his picture boards for complex ideas. He made a friend, another dragon youth named Tyler who shared his love of celestial patterns. The two boys would sit for hours, arranging star charts together in comfortable silence. Rachel watched father and son grow closer every day. Theron had become fluent in Ethan's communication style. He understood when his son needed space and when he craved connection. He recognized the early signs of sensory overload and helped Ethan retreat before meltdowns occurred. He celebrated his son's unique way of seeing the world. One afternoon, a minor noble visiting from a border system made a terrible mistake. During a state luncheon, he commented loudly about the strange prince and questioned whether someone so odd should inherit the throne. The dining hall fell completely silent. Every being present knew Emperor Theron's temper was legendary. They expected an explosion of rage. But Theron did not rage. He stood calmly, his movements controlled and deliberate. He walked to where Ethan sat in his quiet corner, away from the main table, wearing his noise-reducing headphones. The prince was content, eating his preferred foods, safe in his accommodated space. Theron knelt beside his son, bringing himself to eye level. He waited until Ethan noticed him and removed one side of his headphones. Ethan, the Emperor said clearly, using the direct language Rachel had taught him. Lord Gregory said something unkind about you. I want you to know that you are not strange. You are different and your differences make you valuable. You solved a problem that stumped our best engineers. You see patterns others miss. You notice details that change everything. You are exactly who you are meant to be, and I am proud to be your father. Ethan processed the words carefully. Then he did something remarkable. He looked up, not quite making eye contact but close. Proud, he repeated, testing the word. So very proud, Theron confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. The prince nodded once, satisfied. Then he returned to his meal, content. Theron stood and turned to face Lord Gregory. His voice dropped to the dangerous register that made entire star systems tremble. My son is extraordinary. He thinks differently, processes differently, and experiences the world in ways your conventional mind cannot comprehend. That is not strange. That is gift. He has contributed more to this empire in his 8 years than most accomplish in lifetimes. And if you cannot recognize brilliance when you see it, then your limitations far exceed any my son possesses. Lord Gregory left the planet that same evening. The story spread throughout the empire within days. The Dragon Emperor had defended his autistic son not with violence, but with words that celebrated difference. That declared neurodiversity as strength rather than weakness. Rachel had watched from her position near Ethan's corner. Tears streamed down her face. This powerful emperor, this being who had once known only dominance and force, had learned gentleness. Had learned acceptance. Had learned that the strongest protection came from understanding and celebration, not from hiding or changing. Later that night, Theron found Rachel in the palace garden. The moons cast silver light across the flowering trees. She stood by the fountain, her face turned toward the stars. That was beautiful, Rachel said as he approached. What you said to Ethan. How you defended him. You taught me to see him clearly, Theron replied. You taught me that love means accepting, not changing. They stood in the moonlight, the distance between them charged with everything unspoken. Months of growing feelings. Deepening connection. Undeniable attraction. Rachel, Theron said carefully. You have transformed my son's life. You have changed how I understand strength, leadership, and love. You have challenged every belief I held and been right about all of it. I just helped you see what was always there, Rachel said. No. Theron moved closer. You gave me new eyes. You taught me that true power includes compassion. That real strength embraces vulnerability. That the wisest leaders adapt rather than dominate. He paused, gathering courage. You have become essential to us. To Ethan. To me. I cannot imagine our lives without you. Rachel's heart pounded. Theron, she whispered. I know our species are different, he continued. I know my empire will gossip. I know there are complications and challenges. But I also know that you have touched my heart in ways I never thought possible. And I need to tell you that what I feel for you goes far beyond gratitude or respect. Before Rachel could respond, a small voice called from the garden entrance. Father? Rachel? They turned to find Ethan standing there in his sleeping clothes, picture board clutched in his hands. He approached slowly and held up the board. He pointed to an image he had created himself, a picture of the three of them standing together. Beneath it, he had placed a heart symbol. Family, the picture read. Rachel knelt beside Ethan, her eyes shining with tears. Yes, she whispered. Family. Theron joined them, his massive form somehow fitting perfectly into their circle. He looked at his son, who had brought them together. At Rachel, who had taught them both what love truly meant. And in that moment, under the silver moonlight, three hearts recognized each other. Dragon and human. Father, son, and the woman who had shown them that the strongest bonds were built not on sameness, but on acceptance. Not on conformity, but on celebration of difference. The Emperor's heart, once stirred, now beat fully with love he never expected to find. 6 months after Rachel arrived at the palace, Emperor Theron called for the grandest ceremony the Celestial Dragon Empire had seen in decades. Representatives from all 12 star systems gathered in the massive ceremonial hall. Thousands of beings filled the space, their excited voices echoing off crystal pillars that reached toward the vaulted ceiling. On the dais stood Emperor Theron in full ceremonial regalia, his silver scales polished to mirror brightness. Beside him stood Prince Ethan, wearing specially designed robes that Rachel had commissioned. Soft fabric instead of the traditional scratchy materials. No heavy embellishments that would press uncomfortably against his skin. Weighted slightly for the calming pressure his nervous system craved. The young prince wore his noise-reducing headphones, designed to look ceremonial rather than medical. He held his picture board close, a tool rather than a shame. And beside Ethan stood Rachel. No longer dressed as a servant or simple caretaker. She wore robes marking her as imperial advisor, deep blue fabric embroidered with silver stars. Her transformation was not just in clothing. She stood with confidence, with authority, with the bearing of someone who had fundamentally changed an empire. The crowd settled into expectant silence. Emperor Theron stepped forward, his voice amplified to reach every corner of the vast hall. Today I announce the Ethan Accord, he declared. Named for my son who has taught this empire that strength comes in many forms. Murmurs rippled through the audience. The Ethan Accord. Named for the prince many had once called defective. Theron detailed the new policies Rachel had spent months developing. Every educational institution across all 12 systems would train teachers in neurodiversity. Schools would provide quiet rooms for students who needed sensory breaks. Visual schedules would be standard in classrooms. Alternative communication methods would be accepted and celebrated, not just tolerated. Public spaces throughout the empire would include accommodations. Lighting options for those sensitive to brightness. Quiet zones in busy areas. Clear signage and predictable layouts for those who struggled with unexpected changes. Texture warnings on foods and fabrics. Employment programs would recognize different working styles. Some minds needed quiet to focus. Some needed movement. Some needed flexible schedules or specific environmental conditions. These were not weaknesses to overcome but differences to accommodate. For too long, Theron continued, his voice carrying weight and emotion, we measured worth by a single standard. We valued only those who thought like the majority, who processed like the majority, who communicated like the majority. We called difference defect. We tried to eliminate what we should have celebrated. He turned to look at Ethan. The prince was managing the overwhelming ceremony by focusing on his picture board, organizing and reorganizing the images and soothing patterns. Rachel stood close enough to offer support but far enough to give him space. Exactly what he needed. My son experiences the world differently than I do, Theron said. His mind works in ways mine never could. Sounds I find pleasant cause him pain. Textures I ignore overwhelm him. Changes I embrace distress him. And because of these differences, because his brain processes information uniquely, he sees patterns I would miss. Solutions I cannot find. Beauty I would overlook. The Emperor's voice grew stronger. He is not broken. He never was. We were broken. Broken in our understanding. Broken in our compassion. Broken in our narrow definition of strength. We built an empire that worked for one kind of mind and called everyone else defective. That ends today. The crowd erupted in applause. Not polite ceremonial clapping but genuine, enthusiastic support. The sound grew thunderous. Ethan immediately pressed his hands over his ears, even through the headphones. Rachel activated the noise-dampening field she had installed around his position on the dais. The volume around the prince dropped to tolerable levels. He relaxed, able to participate in his own celebration on his own terms. This empire will no longer force citizens to fit a single mold, Theron declared. We will adapt our systems to include all kinds of minds, all ways of being. Because diversity, true diversity of thought and processing and experience, makes us stronger, not weaker. The Ethan Accord is not charity. It is not special treatment. It is recognition that we have been measuring value incorrectly, and it is past time we corrected that mistake. The ceremony continued with the signing of the formal accord. Planetary governors lined up to add their seals. Educational leaders pledged implementation. Medical professionals committed to new training. The empire was transforming before everyone's eyes. After the public ceremony ended, Rachel found Theron in his private chambers. He had removed the heavy ceremonial crown and looked exhausted but deeply satisfied. You changed the empire, Rachel said softly, entering the room. We changed the empire, Theron corrected, turning to face her. None of this happens without you. You brought the knowledge, the compassion, the vision of what we could become. Rachel moved closer. When I came here I thought I was just taking a job. Another teaching position. Another chance to help one child. I never imagined I would help reshape an entire civilization. Theron reached out and Rachel took his massive scaled hand in both of hers. The size difference was comical but the connection was real. Over the past months, they had learned to navigate the physical differences between dragon and human. She understood his body language now. He had learned to be gentle with his strength. When I came here, Rachel continued, I was running from exhaustion and disappointment. I had fought so hard on Earth and felt like I had barely made a dent. But here, with you, with Ethan, I found something I had given up hoping for. What is that? Theron asked quietly. Purpose, Rachel said. Family. And something I never expected to find at all. Theron waited, his golden eyes fixed on her face. Love, Rachel whispered. I found love. The Emperor transformed then, using the rare ability few dragons possessed. His form shimmered and reshaped, scales giving way to human appearance while maintaining his distinctive golden eyes. He had been practicing this transformation for weeks, wanting to be able to hold Rachel properly without his massive dragon size making it awkward. I have been wanting to ask you something, Theron said, now in human form and able to stand face to face with her. Will you stay? Not as an employee or advisor, though you are brilliant at both. But as partner. As co-parent to Ethan. As my companion and equal in all things. Rachel looked up at him. Your empire might not accept a human at the Emperor's side. There will be resistance, gossip, maybe worse. My empire will learn, Theron said firmly. Just as I learned. Change is possible. You proved that. We proved that together. And anyone who cannot accept you does not deserve a place in the empire we are building. Then yes, Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion. Yes to all of it. Their kiss was gentle, a meeting of two hearts that had found each other through the most unexpected path. A child's needs had brought them together. Love had made them stay. A small sound interrupted them. They turned to find Ethan standing in the doorway, still in his ceremonial robes, picture board in hand. He approached slowly and held up an image he had created. It showed the three of them together, surrounded by stars. Rachel had learned to read his visual language fluently. He says we shine brighter together, she translated, tears streaming down her face. Ethan allowed his father to pick him up, something he only tolerated when warned and when he felt safe. The three of them stood together in the Emperor's private chambers, an unusual family by any standard but perfect in their own way. You know, Theron said thoughtfully, Ethan has already revolutionized our navigation systems. I believe he has many more gifts to share with the Empire. As long as we let him share them his way, Rachel said. Always his way, Theron agreed. We adapt to him. Not the other way around. Ethan, comfortable in his father's arms with Rachel close, hummed his familiar three notes. But then he added a fourth note and a fifth, creating a new melody. A new pattern. He is growing, Rachel whispered. Evolving. But staying true to himself. In the weeks that followed, the Ethan Accord transformed the Empire in practical, tangible ways. Autistic dragon youth who had been hidden by ashamed families came forward. Programs flourished in schools. Workplaces adapted. Public spaces became accessible to different minds. And at the center of it all, Prince Ethan continued to map the stars in his unique way. He made more discoveries. Solved more problems. But more importantly, he simply existed as himself, celebrated rather than corrected. Theron learned that the greatest emperors did not just conquer territories. They conquered limited thinking. They built empires not just of planets but of acceptance and inclusion. Rachel, who had left Earth exhausted from fighting for understanding, discovered that sometimes the battle was worth it. Especially when it meant changing not just individual lives but entire civilizations. Together, Dragon Emperor, Human Teacher, and Extraordinary Prince proved that love and acceptance could transform worlds. That strength included gentleness. That power embraced diversity. That the most valuable perspectives often came from those who saw the universe differently than everyone else. The star charts Ethan created hung throughout the Empire, not just as tools but as symbols. Reminders that different minds saw different patterns and all those patterns had value. In quiet moments, when ceremonies ended and crowds dispersed, the three of them would sit in Ethan's peaceful room, arranging stars and crystals, humming gentle melodies, simply being present with each other. A family built not on sameness but on acceptance, not on conformity but on celebration of difference. And the Emperor's heart, once stirred by watching a human maid comfort his autistic son, now beat with the steady rhythm of a love that had changed everything. Retry.